bad.
What's up? 2018. I'm back. First episode of the new year. I'm Ricky Varandas. This is Ripple Effect Podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sticking with me and holding on until I finally get an episode out in the new year. So I'm really excited to bring you this episode. Two past guests, Vinnie and Brian, two musicians, two thinkers, two super interesting people. Vinnie has been on with James Corbett, episode 138. You can listen to our conversation. That was part 1. That conversation went really well, so we did a part 2, which is episode 148. So check out 138 and 148 for the conversation with James Corbett and Vinnie. And check out episode 141, which is with the lead singer, lyricist, and guitarist of Contortion, which is a metal political band from California. That was another really fun and interesting conversation, so definitely check that out. And so yeah, check out our archives. 138, 148 for Vinnie's last appearances on the show with James Corbett, and then 141 with Brian Stone's appearance on the Ripple Effect Podcast. He also has been on the Tinfoil Hat Podcast with Sam Tripoli. It's actually how I found out about Brian and the band Contortion. So if you want to hear about that story, check out the podcast that I did with Brian, the 141 episode, and then you'll hear the story about how I found out about his band. And same thing with Vinnie. If you want to know how I hooked up with Vinnie, check out part 138, episode 138, and you'll be able to hear about how we all got hooked up, Vinnie, James, and I. So with that out of the way, they did call in using video, and like I always tell you guys, any guest that calls in using video, you'll be able to go on our YouTube channel, RV Theory 6, which is also my Twitter handle and also my Instagram name. You can see the video version of the episodes. Hopefully my Skype recording software worked. I've had some issues with it, but if it worked, then you'll be able to see Vinnie, Brian, and I actually have this conversation. Or you can just search Ripple Effect Podcast and you'll find our YouTube channel. And in the show description, I always put links to our guests' social media sites and their personal sites and any websites that they may have. I put them all there so it's easy to find more info on them if you'd like. And also I put links to my music if you want to support the show, my Patreon page if you want to support the show. And if you really want to support the show and you don't want to financially support the show, then no problem. Just share the show, spread the conversations, like it, retweet it, rate it on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts, and Stitcher or wherever, and that'll go a long way. So that will help. So I think that's it for now. Hopefully I have a bunch of guests that I'm in the process of scheduling, so hopefully I get in a good rhythm now that 2018 started and I got my first episode out of the way and we start getting shows every week. So thanks everybody who's been holding on since my last episode, which I think might have been a little bit ago, maybe 2-3 weeks ago, with Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson from Conspiracy Farm Podcast. And also Pat Miletich, that name might sound familiar because he's also a MMA UFC legend, but check that one out. But if it's been too long, hopefully I get the next one out sooner. I do have a guest, I think, booked for next week, so I think I just have to confirm it. But hopefully things start flowing and we get a bunch of shows out. And I don't like making you guys wait too long because in the world of social media and tons of podcasts and tons of YouTube videos and shows and entertainment, it's easy to forget about somebody if you're gone for too long. So also, before I forget, Brian Stone's band Contortion just came out with a new album called False Flag Paradigm. I highly recommend it if you like music with a meaning, if you like metal, if you like political music. Support a band that's actually trying to say something and actually has meaning in their songs. So definitely check that out. And also, Vinnie has a great YouTube channel. If you're learning to play the guitar, if you'll learn about musical theory, then check out his YouTube channel. He has tons of really interesting videos. And also check that out. I'll put links to all that stuff in the show description. So thanks again, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. Yeah, awesome. So thanks, guys, for being with me. This is awesome. I love doing these roundtable discussions because the whole point of this podcast is to share ideas and share interesting people with the listeners. And when you get a roundtable discussion, it's always nice because somebody will have a question or have something to add to the discussion that just myself might not pick up on or whatnot. So it always makes for fun. And I think like two guests, maybe three might be the limit. I think if you get too many people, then it can get a little, everybody talking over one another or whatnot. But I think two guests is perfect. Me and Vinny have done it with James Corbett a few times, and I've done it with a couple other guests, Adam Kokesh and Hunter Motz and James Corbett and Richard Grove, and they're always fun. They're a blast just sharing ideas and talking, especially once the conversation starts flowing. So thanks again, guys, for being with me. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm glad we were able to schedule it. It almost seemed like we'd have to push it back to February for a brief moment there, but everything seemed to come together right at the last moment there.
Yeah, and my wife ended up picking up a shift tonight, and then my parents just came back from Portugal, and I'm like, hey, can you watch the kids? My wife might pick up a shift. They're like, yeah, no problem. So I literally just came from their house. I drove there, and nobody was home, and I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, where are you? And then finally I'm calling their cell phone. They picked up, like, oh, we're actually right down the street. And I'm like, okay, thank God. And because then I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, dude, if I have to reschedule, I'm like, I don't know when these guys are going to both be free at the same time again. So I was hoping that wasn't the case, but so it all worked out. But thank you so much for being with me. The nice thing about this podcast is that I get to interview so many different people, different backgrounds, different interests, even different interests, but a lot of parallel thinking, a lot of just people who are like the one, I think, common denominator I can say about all my guests. Everybody's really curious and everybody's really open to sharing their ideas, but also to new ideas and having their own ideas challenged. And I think that's a huge part of growing and figuring out who you are as a person and just really trying to figure out this what's the whole purpose of this journey we call life. And I think music is a big part of that, because I think a lot of what music is you're trying to do some maybe self-reflecting, some therapy. I think we all probably got into it because we're trying to fight some internal demons, or we had some issues we're trying to resolve. And I think that's why when you meet musicians, it doesn't matter what type of music you're into. If you're into interesting music, it doesn't matter what genre it is. If you're into good music, then usually you're a pretty interesting person. For the most part, I think 9 out of 10 times I can hold a conversation with somebody who is a musician, regardless what type of music they're into, much better than I can the average person. And I think that says something about who they are and whatnot. But for listeners who might have not heard your past episodes, and maybe for you guys who might not be familiar with your backgrounds, if you guys want to share how you got into playing the guitar, because at heart you're both guitarists, and what influenced you, maybe what was your biggest influence to play the guitar? I mean, I'll just share a quick story of mine really quickly. This is pretty simple and short, but the first time I saw the One video by Metallica, it blew me away and made me want to play guitar. And that was the song and the video that just blew me away. James Hetfield, the whole band, just the head banging and the energy and the darkness to it. And I wonder if you guys have a story of maybe the album, the artist, the moment in your life where you like, no, I want to play this instrument. Or maybe it was just as simple as you wanted to get laid. That works too.
I'll let Vinny take the first round there.
Okay, well, I'm an old codger. Unfortunately, aging tends to happen, so I go way back. And for me, it was when the Beatles hit American shores. I was utterly mind-blown seeing them on the Ed Sullivan Show. Had an older sister. Her and her friends gathered around the TV set and were screaming. And I thought, it was for the chicks at first. It's like, I want to be cool. I want to play guitar. And like a good friend of mine once said recently, he's also started playing guitar for the same reasons. And he goes, we picked up the guitar in order to become famous. Who knew we were going to actually be artists instead? And that's really what happened. You know, the music eventually became art for me, and I don't really give much of a shit about fame anymore, you know, when you see it happen. So, yeah, the Beatles started it off, but as for like the art of playing guitar, it was when I first heard Eric Clapton, and it was a guitar solo to a song called Badge. And I remember like playing that record over and over again, because every time it came to a certain section, chills went up and down my spine. And I thought, this is it. This is what I want to do. So the artistic part still hit kind of early. And I wanted to be able to, you know, produce that effect for other people. I want to be able to play guitar and make someone cry or laugh or whatever, you know, and I'm still doing it. It's what I love.
That's amazing. I don't really have a what you might call a definitive moment where I ultimately said, this is what I'm going to do. I can remember, I guess as far back as I have memories, being that kid with the broom or the tennis racket or the what have you, pretending to play guitar in my bedroom for my stuffed animals and like toy dinosaurs, and you know, in the garage rocking out to whatever was on the radio at the time. And it was, music had always affected me in profound ways since I can always remember. In fact, my parents used to tell me stories when I was a baby in Germany. They would have to drive around the block repeatedly playing the same album over and over again, and that's the only thing sometimes that would make me go to sleep. So for me, there wasn't a pivotal point or a catalyst, if you will. But as far as the reality of finally getting to play guitar was, I mean, I like your example, Vinny, of the creating the art as opposed to being a rock star sort of thing. Like, once you learn to play, once I had an actual guitar in my hand and it belonged to me, I didn't do anything else for months on end other than try and figure out this new puzzle. Right. And having finally gotten rather what I always wanted to have in my hands, and just watching it unfold, and you know, getting to see friends that I haven't seen since I started playing guitar. Sometimes they're just blown away to be like, you've come this far. And I'm like, yeah, I should have probably come further, to be honest. I have much more higher expectations for myself. But it is a beautiful thing to watch unfold in oneself and in other people. The artistry come out of an individual. It's the language of the soul.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the thing about music too, and there is, you know, you talked about the artistic part of it, and I you know, we are emotional creatures. That's something that you can't avoid. I talk about with Hunter Motz, who's a guest on the show all the time, about how, you know, we like to think that we look at the facts and make rational decisions, but the truth is we usually already decided what our opinion is, and look for the facts to back that opinion, because we are emotional, and there is no such thing as being completely detached from that. And I think music is, you know, one of the many arts like paintings and film, and that really tap into those emotions and really know how to capture it and bring you to a certain place, a certain location. I mean, like you said, like when you hear a song and then it gives you chills. I mean, is there even a explanation of how that happens? I mean, you hear podcasts with comedians and they talk about how it sucks to be a comedian because you tell an old joke and everybody boos you, you know. But if you're a musician, you can be playing the same hit for years and years and years and people still love it. But you know, a lot of other arts, like you know, maybe film, I guess can go either way. You can watch an old movie and still like it, but you can't watch it over and over again like you can a song. And a song you can listen to over and over again, and it still hits you, it still emotionally affects you. And that's something I think special to music. And what do you think that is? I mean, do you think that's because the history of music, I mean, goes way back, civilizations, that it's probably one of the first things that we did as a tribe for entertainment, you know, when we didn't have anything else? Well, what do you think that is, that can tap into that like no other arts seem to do?
I remember reading about Johann Sebastian Bach many years ago. It was probably in one of my music theory classes, but he was one of the between him and what's that guy's name? Pythagoras. Between those two guys, they were able to mathematically begin to work out specific scales and chord movements and things that came to be, I guess, understood to the human ear as related to specific emotions. And I don't know that anybody's ever truly, at least I've never seen a study done on it in any amount of profundity that I've been able to understand, that completely nails it to the floor. But there is a certain amount of, when you think of like a minor scale, a specific like diminished minor scale, like the type that they use in horror movies. So you have a lot of ascending notes that sometimes you get those half steps that make it extra creepy. And, you know, you hear that in a movie or you hear that in a song and immediately you get that chills of like something's about to happen. Something's creeping around the corner. And that was already something that they understood centuries ago, before movies were obviously even a thing, that you could have this attachment to that particular type of chord progression. And then you just see it utilized many, many, many years later into this type of new media and so forth. And the same thing goes with other emotions, with sadness, with happiness, you know, the major chord progressions, which are typically found in a lot of pop music or in children's nursery rhymes. You know, these are the more happy feeling songs, the more happy tunes, because they resonate on a very simplistic and balanced sort of medium on the human ear. Whereas other ones, like other types of minor scales where you'll have, like Slayer uses them a lot, are a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more intense, and give it that evil sound, I guess you might be able to call it. But you also get the other type of minor scales that bands like Pink Floyd will use. And so, you know, their guitarist, whose name just escaped me, Gilmour, Gilmour can play a solo with 5 notes in it and just bring you to tears. And that's, you know, other people have had that power, Clapton and so forth. But there is I fully believe that there is a mathematical harmonic resonance that taps into the harmonic resonance of the human body and the human, I guess you might call it, spirit. And that's what that is that connectivity across the frequencies.
Wow, you hit on so many thoughts that I would love to have commented on, but I'll just give my little blurb here. I'm reminded back in the ancient days of computerdom, there was one of the first video games was a text-based game. It was called Zork. And with Zork, basically you had to type in commands. And if you got the right command, you moved through the game. So for example, the way the game started was it would say, you're standing in front of a house. There's a mailbox. What would you like to do? So you type in open the mailbox, right? And then, okay, mailbox open. What would you like to do? Read what's inside. You haven't picked it up yet. Oh, pick up what's inside. Then read what, so on and so forth, until finally this thing leads you, finally you pull up the carpet in this house and you go to this underground world that, you know, there are gnomes and all this kind of thing, right? But the beauty of this game was that it didn't present the visual images to you on a screen. You had to participate in making the imagery come alive in your own mind. And I think in a similar sense with music, not only does music provide a mood or a backdrop, but it also, you know, like a song with lyrics, it gives you something to set that backdrop to, and then you use your mind to create your own inner landscape of the whole thing. And I think that's the universal element of it. It's so personal, you know, you experience a world inside of yourself that somebody else might experience totally differently.
Yeah, well, continue.
But one thing that blows my mind, and this is just the existential fact of music, one thing that utterly blows my mind, first of all, neuroscientists have found that there's a part of the brain that has been in the human brain since the beginning that's dedicated to processing music. So what the fuck? Where did, what, why, how, right? So when you talk about minor scales and how moody they are, right? Why is it we strike a minor chord and it sounds sad? We strike a major chord, oh, the sun's coming out, everything's beautiful. What is it that makes, even like root, you know, like there's a root chord to this progression. Why do you feel like you came home to this chord? I mean, animals don't hear this sort of thing. Humans do. This is mind-blowing, and there is no science, I don't think, that exists right now that can explain why this mystery happens. But this is what makes music a spiritual experience. And I recently had a Facebook post. I have a little hobby. I like to create little aphorisms and sayings. And I did this one Facebook post that said, music has the power. Oh, Ricky, you said like you go to other places when you hear music. I used to believe that too, but now I figured out the places come to you. You don't go to places. And so my thought was that music has the power to elicit the echoes of other worlds into this world. And that's what makes it so beautiful and mysterious. You want to create hell? You can create hell. You want to create heaven? You can create heaven, you know? And it brings those heavens and hells into your own mind. That is, I certainly hope there's such thing as reincarnation, because I'm not done with this shit yet, you know?
Well, it's funny that Brian Briggs, once he said music theory, that's Vinny's, he's a black belt in music theory. So he you know, he could talk all day on music theory. And I think it's so interesting, because I think the common person will just listen to stuff and they move this stuff. Like, it's funny, growing up being Portuguese, my parents and I hated, like, this, they hated my music, I hated their music. They grew up on Portuguese music, which was all about accordion and guitars, you know, string instruments, but not the type of string instruments that you know, not the type of guitar that I like to play. And it was all about dancing and enjoying company. But to me, music was always more personal. To me, I had to feel something emotionally that was darker. And you know, it wasn't so much because I liked being in that place, but there's something about feeling something, regardless if it's sad or depression or whatever, that makes you feel human. Because really, that's I guess what makes us different than robots or whatnot. And I think there's something about depressing music and stuff that I loved. The fact that it could tap into that and feeling something was just so powerful to me that I really enjoyed it. I mean, it was really hard growing up, where people were like, "What are you depressed about? You're 16, you know, or what are you depressed about? You're 15." I'm like, "Well, I'm you know,
16.
Yeah, exactly." But it is funny, because when you're a kid, it's funny because when you're a kid, you look at adults talk to you like that, and they talk to you like, you know, what are you upset about? But if in that moment, if that breakup with that girl means the world to you, and emotionally it will affect you the same way that adult going through a 20-year, you know, marriage, now going through a divorce. Like, why is it any different, you know? So I know we look down and like, well, you don't know what true love is, you're 16. Well, fuck it, man. Sometimes I think a 16-year-old knows what true love is better than a 36-year-old, because at 16 you're kind of naive to the world. You're kind of you haven't been, it almost, you know, it's funny because I remember growing up and I was always one of those guys that I probably look back and I say like, oh, I probably should have hooked up with her when I had that. And you know, it's like there's a lot of girls that I'm like, oh, but you know, she's kind of into me, and I want to be a nice guy. And I kept thinking, like, I would always do these really nice guy things. I'm like, I never want to burn bridges with anybody. I never want to, you know. I'm like, they're like, oh, why don't you just stop? Why don't you just ignore her calls? And I'm like, because I don't want to be a dick. They're like, who cares? You don't want to date her? And I'm like, yeah, but you know, and. You know, I remember telling myself, I'm constantly surrounded by people who think differently, and I go out and I see people who are married, dancing with other people, or going home with other. I'm like, I feel like the world's so cold that eventually it turns you into what everybody already is, and it's hard to kind of, you know, be that pure person, because eventually you give in. You're like, well, everybody else is a fucking asshole. Why shouldn't I be? You know. And so I think when you're a kid, you're in that place where, you know, everything does. If it feels like love, and you're so obsessed over this thing because you don't have all these other distractions either, like work and priorities and cutting the grass and all this stuff, to me it almost is realer than ever in life. And that's why some really great music comes when, you know, it's the first album of an artist, or when they're young, you know, they write, because maybe they're not as wise as an older person, but they're definitely more, they could I shouldn't say definitely, but in many times you're more passionate. You have, you know, in metal you see bands a lot of times get less angry in time. You know, maybe it's a lack of energy. When we get old, we just have less energy to be angry. But I don't know what it is. But I definitely think when you're young, it's a beautiful thing having all those emotions and being able to tap into it and then expose it through music, because it almost seems like as you get older, you do get a little colder at times. You know, and you do get a little. You think certain things just don't matter, you know, like, oh, you know, when I was young, I was passionate, I was going to change the world. I mean, look at protesters. I mean, look at, John Kerry, who was a war activist and this protester, and then all of a sudden he kind of gave into the system and just became one of them, you know. And
he was a traitor. Yeah, he was a traitor.
Yeah. So I mean,
No doubt.
you know, I wonder how much that I'm sure there should have been a question in there somewhere instead of just a long rant. But you guys want to add to that? And any opinions on any of that? Do you feel okay? So let me turn it into a question. So with age, how have you seen your interest in music? How have you seen your I guess your opinions in music? I mean, has your taste changed? Has your playing changed? Has anything? Have you seen a transition? Because it seems like a lot of artists do mellow out when they get older. Not all. I mean, Brian brought up Slayer. Slayer's still kicking ass. Metallica's still kicking ass. Iron Maiden's still touring. There's a lot of bands that still kick ass. It seems like metal is the exception to the rule. It seems like it's like a cult that none of us want. We're okay with being in. We're like, no, we want to be metal, and we want to be metal forever, and that's it. But it does seem like, you know, certain bands that I know friends of mine listen to, like Pearl Jam or whatever, they talk about how, you know, they grow up with this band. Oh, did we lose Brian? We might have lost Brian.
Did we lose you, Brian?
Well, while we try to get him back, you want to add to that, Vinny? What do you think? Has your taste changed?
Absolutely, but I won't say that the taste itself has changed. What I think happens is you build layers of taste on. In other words, like, I grew up on the Beatles. I still fucking love the Beatles. I could analyze their music all day and have a great time of it. But on top of, like, say when I was 16, I couldn't stand jazz. Now I can virtually only listen to jazz at this point. We're getting some sort of.
I think, is that an airplane, Brian? I think sounds like an airplane going.
Not near me. There's a motorcycle off in the distance, but.
Oh, maybe that's what it was. Yeah.
So right now I'm at a point where I'm very, very sensitive to music. So I train I have kind of a problem because I train my ears really well. So when I hear a pop song, I go, it's this set of changes. I can be driving along, hear a pop song, and I know what the chords are. And I think to myself, been there, done that. And I just get bored. So now in my older years, I really enjoy jazz and I love to listen to it. So, you know, it's not that I've lost taste for the old things. I just created a wider field. Actually, as an older man, I'm much more open to all sorts of music now than I was back then.
I would agree. I'm the same exact way. I think musicians that push themselves to become better artists end up becoming that way over time by default, because in the sense that we're trying to advance and we're trying to understand our art on a better level, that we're almost obliged to listen to more music and to become more open-minded. And I too, when I would venture to say, you know, techno wasn't really a thing when I started playing guitar, but became a lot more popular over time. And now I'm not, you know, an EDM nut job or anything, but I do like a lot of DJs and a lot of that style, and can appreciate what that adds to the music scene. I do like a lot of underground hip hop. You know, I still listen to the classics that I was raised on, like Electric Light Orchestra and Pearl Jam or Pink Floyd, but even the stuff I learned when I was younger, like Pearl Jam and the grunge scene. But it's beautiful to watch metal become, I guess, the one genre that is constantly pushing the envelope, constantly growing, becoming more technical, becoming more advanced in everything from tunings and progressions to timings to everything. You mentioned jazz. I think metal has taken on a lot of the jazz influence and turned it into their own thing in the past, 15, 20 years. And it's been phenomenal to watch. And I stand in awe in all of it, and can definitely agree that growing has been the biggest attribute for me with music in my personal playing and in my listening catalog.
Now, one thing that me and other people who like, I guess good music would, and then of course that's subjective, would talk about is why does such shitty music get so popular? And I have this theory that like Vinnie talked about, like he gets bored with it, and I'm the same way. Like I'll listen to it and I'm like, I'll tell my wife Gina, I'm like, this sounds just like that other song. It's the same fucking beat. It's the same melody. It's the same whatever. I'm like, or this is a ripoff of that, And I do understand. I remember Dimebag Darrell used to say that, talking about he's the guitarist of Pantera, rest in peace, Dimebag. But he used to talk about how we're all just sharing each other's riffs, and it's true. Like every guitar riff has probably been played already 1,000 times, and we're just, you could probably analyze if you had a computer that could analyze every piece of music downloaded on the internet, they would find a billion similarities of like, oh, that riff sounds like this, or this riff sounds like that. And I think it's interesting because I think that we are, a lot of stuff in some senses are going to be redone again. But I think that's where like genres like metal, or even I think that's one reason I've always been really intrigued with metal and electronic music, because those are two genres growing up that I always felt like were pushing it. You had the industrial scene that was asking the question like, well, what's the instrument? Why can't we just make these noises and make this a song and use these weird sounds and all this stuff? And it's like, really push the question, well, why do we have to use a traditional guitar and bass and drums and all this stuff? And to me, that was really intriguing. That's why I always seem to be into industrial music and metal music, because metal the same way. I mean, when Fear Factory was doing death metal, then started adding keyboards and clean vocals, and it was like metal and keyboards, you couldn't do that. That was against the rules, and I think bands do that in those genres. But back to the original question, I feel like, if you really can analyze music and you're into it, then it does sound repetitive, and it sounds boring, and you get bored with the popular music. But I think humans in general, like, it's all about the path of less resistance. Like, we're constantly looking for the easier way of doing things. Every piece of technology that's evolved, has basically been to try to find an easier way to do something. We created fire, then we created the wheel, then the car, and then we created emails instead of snail mail. So like, we're constantly, and I wonder if like mentally it's the same thing. Like some people listen to what's easier to digest, and we're like, somebody like us might be intrigued with something that sparks provokes thought and makes you kind of like, what the hell is going on in this song, or where is this song going? Like, to me, those are the songs and artists I love the most. The ones where I'm listening to a song and I'm not quite sure where the song's going or where it's heading, and you're listening to it and you're like, oh, I didn't see that coming, or the next track doesn't sound like the last track. Like, to me, that's what's pleasant. But but there's a huge majority of people who just love the same old. Like, why do you think that is? Because, sometimes we laugh about how me and a couple of my friends are like, I could never write a hit because I would write it down and be like, holy crap, this is dog shit. Like, I can't sing this. This is, you know what I mean? Like, because when you look at some of the lyrics and the melodies and some of the songs that are popular, and you're like, wait, this is why I'm hot. This is why I'm hot. I'm hot because I'm fly. Yeah. You ain't because you not. I'm like, who could write that down, be in a studio saying that, and then be like, this is going to be a hip-hop hit? I would have been like, that's not, like, that's so stupid. But it is. And you see it all the time with, like, especially in hip-hop, like the Dougie, and I wonder how much of that is maybe because of they like the slang, and people are attracted to, like, oh, these are new slang words. These are new, it's more like this is representing our culture, But it's weird. What's your guys' opinion on that? What do you think attracts people to this simple, repetitive type of music? Boring maybe. I'm
gonna go out on a limb on this one, and a lot of people might not really be attuned to what I'm about to say, or maybe even agree with it, but it comes back to my theory on resonance. So if you read into like things like the Hindu Vedas, and if you understand Buddhism, and you understand things like the chakras and so forth, in a lot of ancient mystical writings, there is a lot of ideas towards the human resonance. And you have low frequency people. And these are people, I guess, in the chakra idea, that are in their root chakra. This is the base level. This is like the lizard brain type of people, scenario. And they're in the flight or fight mode. They're in the most simplistic way they can get through the day, through their life, through their everything. And then you have other stages that go up from there. And I think whether we want to really attribute it to some type of mystical belief, or just in the basic understanding that people as a whole do have levels of simplicity and intricacy. And moreover, you're going to find, as far as the populace goes, you're going to find a shit ton more people in the median, in the average, that group, that large percentage that don't understand what's going on in politics, the wind's picking up, that don't understand what's going on in the political world. They don't understand, what type of music, people like you and I appreciate. They're not researching, involved mathematics or sciences or anything, because they just want to go through the motions to get through the day. And then the more advanced or high vibrational the person, the more you're willing to accept the more intricate music or the more intricate art. And that comes, I think, at many different turns and many different points in history. When you look at things like Impressionism or Cubism during the artistic movements, these are people who were, on a new vibration. They were on a higher vibration, looking towards the future, looking towards a new art style, looking towards something more profound. And within that, it seems a little bit overly poetic and maybe a little overly spiritual, but that's kind of the way I've always viewed it. And I do attempt to push the envelope for some of my friends or people that I'm acquainted with, of like, you should check this out, you should check this out, to try and see if there's that trigger moment, that one straw that breaks their camel's back for art in any way, shape, or form, to invite them into the fold of like, okay, now you're growing, now you're experiencing new things, and now you're outside of the the proverbial Mary had a little lamb for the populace, for the mainstream, if you will, of music.
What you mentioned about the chakras, I mean, one of the things I'm going to expand on what you said, Brian, is that one of the ideas I have, like, you go back to Pythagoras, all right, and he had this metal bar and he clanged it, then he cut it in half and found out it was an octave higher when you clang it after you cut it in half, and from there he developed the scales we have today. And I thought about this. I thought, well, why does a piece of metal contain a tone? And not only that, but overtones that contain the entire scale anyway, literally within one tone, right? The overtone series. That's really where the scale comes from. So I developed a theory where every physical object contains the scale, the basic scale we have, right? And when you look at the human system, well, the scale is 7 notes. You look at the chakra system, and we have 7 chakras. So, right? So that's I just wanted to comment that way, because that's one of the theories that's been going through my head, Now, as far as, Ricky, we kind of touched on this conversation with James. You said, like, why do people go for the LCD, the lowest common denominator, And so we could flirt on the border of, is this something that's consciously being perpetrated by the music industry to keep people in a low vibration?
I totally believe that. I'm just going to throw that out there right now. Well, please continue.
I asked the question, but I truly believe that I think that people's interest in music is only a reflection of our society. I think we're constantly creating a system where people just, you're stop. I mean, look at the things that they stop in school systems. Usually it's anything that involves imagination, critical thinking. So you're creating these sheeple who just kind of go with the herd. We tell them, hey, you want to get a good job, just be good at memorizing this information and just regurgitating it, and we'll give you good grades, and you go to college and get a good job, and then you'll buy that house, and you create this debt, but you'll have a good job to pay off this debt, and you'll be happy. And nobody ever thinks outside the box. Nobody ever looks at, and I've had this conversation with, like, I talked about my parents just came back from Portugal, and I haven't been there since I was 16, I think. So I'm 32 now, so it's been a while, and my dad hasn't been there in like 12 years, and he's like, they're so much happier there. He's like, all they do is eat and drink and they barely work. And I'm like, and I told my father this. I'm like, yeah. And before you went there, I remember you telling me that everybody back in Portugal, how lazy they are. And I'm like, cause and this is true. A lot of my Italian friends, my Portuguese friends, my Western European friends who were born there like I was and came here, like they all talk about how lazy their family members are back in the old country. And I keep arguing with them like, yeah, but I'm like, are they lazy or have they figured it out? I'm like, people here get caught up in this meaningless, just trying to gather as many ones and zeros in a bank account as much as possible without any end game, any goal. Like I know people who just work crazy hours, not because they want to buy a new car or they want to move to a different neighborhood or because literally for no reason but for the sake of working. And then they're like, oh, I need a vacation. I'm like, you just need to get your shit together and figure out that like you have been convinced that work is always good, regardless if you're happy, if it's fulfilling, if you get anything out of it, it's always good. And this goes back to a guest that I've had on in the past, Thaddeus Russell, who wrote the Renegade History of the United States, and he's a historian who talks about the Puritan ancestors and how this comes from our Puritan ancestors. This idea that like work is always good, and it's true. Like if you're a parent and you have a daughter, and your daughter's like, oh, there's these two guys I like, and one's an investment banker, and the other one's a struggling musician, you'd be like, fuck that dude. He lives in a one-room apartment. He needs to get his shit together. Date the guy who's an investment banker. But that's my point. Like we judge people based on these financial gains and how much money they make, and we're now like, well, let me meet these guys and be like, oh shit, the artist, he's chasing a dream, and he's happy, and he's chasing it, and he's gonna look back at his life with much less regrets than the investment banker who's doing just a cutthroat job of just screwing people and basically contributing nothing to society. But it's like Graham Hancock says, one of the issues with society is that we're judged based on what type of car we drive and not how many rides we give with that car. It's a very simple kind of quote that kind of just it's the truth. I mean, you look at Donald Trump. I mean, I remember seeing this little video on YouTube of rappers who kind of talk about how they want to get rich like Donald Trump before he was president, and then they were like, this guy's a dickhead, like this guy's racist, this guy's this and that. And it's like, yeah, because you almost have to be him, like to be that. There's very few people who are multimillionaires who didn't step on top of people, who didn't screw somebody, who didn't basically live a very selfish lifestyle and life to get there. But yet we look at them and we're like, yeah, like that guy's rich. I want to be like him. I want to be Warren Buffett. I want to be George Soros. I want to be all these people. It's instead of being like, no, I want to be the guy who maybe is a welder for a living, but he's happy as fuck because that's what he loves doing. And it's funny, I use the welder as an example because I have a friend recently who not too long ago he did alternative energy. And for this firm who did projects for NASA and all types, and what sounds like really interesting and impressive stuff, but he's always loved welding on the side. He'd work on old cars, and he always loved welding, and he'd work on just his classic cars and his classic trucks and all that stuff, and he got an offer to do some welding as a full-time job, and his girlfriend's like, crazy, man. Like you're making more money. It's a better career. You don't want to be known as a welder. And then I remember us talking, and he's like, Ricky, what do you think? And I'm like, dude, if it makes you happy, I'm like, fucking do it. I'm like, you hate your job. I'm like, who cares what people think? Like when you introduce yourself as a welder instead of a guy who does projects for NASA. I'm like, who cares? I'm like, you're happy. You're gonna be a better sibling, you're going to be a better son, you're going to be a better boyfriend, you're going to be a better everything, because you're going to come home happy and you're going to enjoy what you do, and that's much more important than any other bullshit. But it's this pressure from society and culture that it's like, you have to have this white picket fence, and you have to get this job that makes more money, and you always have to take the overtime, and you always have to take the job opportunity that pays more. But you're seeing a transition, and I've talked to a lot of other business owners who and I've like, they talk about how the young generation coming up, like they're all lazy and they don't want to work, and they don't want to work overtime. I'm like, yeah, because they figured it out, because they see their fucking parents who are working 90 hours a week, and they're divorced, or they're alcoholics, or they're unhappy, and they're like, no, I'm happiest when I'm around communities, when I'm around my friends. And the way I look at it, if somebody gave you the option, it's like, hey, if you could do more of the things you want to do and less of the things you have to do, who wouldn't take that? Like, so if you can just maybe drive an older car, maybe live in a little smaller house, but have more free time and not have to be a slave to your job, then why the fuck wouldn't you do that? So this idea that it took this long to figure it out, to me, that's what's like mind blowing, but there's still a lot of people that look at somebody who works 80 hours a week, and they're like, oh yeah, that guy works like crazy. He works overtime, then he does side jobs and this. And I'm like, for what? Like, what is he trying to accomplish? What is, like, all that material stuff that he's gonna gather or buy to kind of just fill that emptiness, because he's not actually doing anything of any substance, is gonna, it's not going to mean anything. He's going to look back at his life and say, what? And I'm notorious for it, because I'll prioritize things that I have to do during the day. And I'll be like, okay, I could either work on, the kitchen or the basement, or do some housework, or I could email people about, guests for a podcast, and I'm always like, music, podcasts, all these things to me, because I'm like, if I get hit by a car today, is anybody going to care that I finished my patio in the backyard? Or are they going to care about the fact that I had these amazing conversations that, these amazing conversations that I put online that somebody might be able to get something from? And to me, like, that's much more important than some fucking, than some housework I have to do, or some overtime I could do. To me, it's just, that stuff's not important to me. And I think that kids coming up are starting to figure that out. And this goes back to the music industry. When we were growing up, if we wanted the new album, we wanted the music we loved, we had to go purchase it, which means that we needed money. We had this respect for money. We had this desire for money, because all the things we enjoyed required money. But kids are growing up today where I'm using Skype for free. My podcast is eventually going to be uploaded and downloaded for free. Everything, so much of what we love is free. So kids are growing up in a world where they're like, I get a lot of the shit I like without money. Money's really not that desirable anymore. Like, I don't have to be a slave to this job or this corporation and do a job I hate and deal with, a boss that's, constantly pushing me and being a jerk or whatever, just so I can get some money and finally get that album I want. Like, I have a lot of the things I enjoy. I have access to literature, to philosophers, to music theory, to artists, to all this stuff online for free. And I think that's one of the changing reasons, one of the reasons why kids are growing up and they're looking at, like, I don't want to work overtime. I don't want to take the position that requires more hours if I can take the position that requires less hours and I still make enough to make a living. And you guys have anything to add to that extremely long rant of mine?
It's funny that you bring that up. I just finished a couple months ago. I finished this book called Abundance, and I really would highly recommend that you read that. It essentially sums up that same thing, but then builds upon the idea and points out plans and things and methods and companies and corporations that could, some are attempting and others that could bring that same type of lifestyle to not just America, but the world at large. And we're talking things like, fundamentals for some people: food, shelter, water, I mean, clean water, when you find out that, you know, less than half of the world can actually just drink clean water, that is insane to contemplate. You know, there was a meme running around with this little boy in it giving this, you know, woman a funny look. And in the meme, it says, "You have so much clean water, you shit in it." You know, and the little kid got this confused face going. You know, it's obviously in a third world country. And, you know, as funny as that is, it's profound. Because when you hear about even places like India, what you think, oh, it's India. They got the Taj Mahal, and, you know, they take all our phone calls when we need to call Verizon and whatever. They don't even have a good portion of that country, like 80% doesn't even have clean water to bathe in or drink. And this book breaks down ways to make that possible, to make food for everybody possible. And if not free, at such extremely low costs that it could be easily, you know, the platform could be built easily for everyone.
Well, there's a percentage. I would recommend you guys listening to a podcast I did with Justin Wren, who was he's an MMA fighter. He's in Bellator. He did fight in the Ultimate Fighter reality show for UFC. But he was this guy who dealt with depression and substance abuse and all this stuff. And then he ended up going to the Congo and falling in love with these pygmies. Do you know about him?
He's the one drilling the wells,
yes,
right?
Yeah, I had him on.
Yes.
And it's a very touching story, because one thing we talked a lot about was how these people are happy as hell in these communities, and they don't have the material wealth we have, and they don't, in many cases, they don't even have clean water, and I forget what the numbers are, but the percentage of people who die just from the lack of access to clean water is mind-blowing. I mean, something that we really take for granted here in Western cultures, but you see that over and over again. You know, you see they find these tribes in the Amazon where they're completely just isolated and from the rest of the modern world, and they have no signs of depression or anxiety or all these symptoms that we have. And you know, Christopher Ryan, who's the host of Tangentially Speaking, and also the author of Sex at Dawn, which is both great stuff to check out. He talked about he's writing a new book called Civilized to Death, and then the subtitle is why, I think I'm gonna fuck this up, but it's like something along the lines of why we have all the shit we want but nobody's happy. And it's kind of true, you know, it's really true. Like, we have all, you know, we keep buying these things that make us happy, but one thing you can learn, you know, and I've said this on the show 1,000 times, so I'm sorry for repeating myself for long-time listeners, but I think we can learn from kids how, you know, when you look at children, and me having two, I've seen it, you know, with my own kids, is that they don't care how many toys I buy them, or how expensive the toy is, or whatever, like, or how big my house is, or how nice my car is. They don't care about any of that stuff. Like, they just want, like, the people they love to be around. They want mom and dad to be around. They want the uncles and aunts that play with them to be around. They want their cousins to be around. They just want to be around their community. They want to be around their tribe. They want to be around people who love them, and they love being around. And I feel like as kids, like, we get it. Like, yeah, community is what's important. Like, this what makes me happy, not this shit. You know, I forget the toy that my dad bought me on this birthday, but I don't forget the time we went to the game together, or the time we threw, you know, I scored that goal and he was there watching, rooting me on. Like, that's the stuff.
Right. It's funny that you bring that up. In fact, just a couple weeks ago during visitation with my daughter, I contemplated that same conversation that we had, and that same point that you brought up. I mean, Christmas just passed, so she's got a few new toys and new outfits and all these things. But while she's visiting here, and some of these toys are super high tech, like they say her name, they talk to her, they interact with her, you know, toys that I could only imagine having as a child myself. And you know, she'll toy with them for a moment, but then she just wants to climb around in the tour van because there's no seats in it, and have me play in there like it's house or something. And, you know, she just wants to roughhouse with me or throw the ball in the grass, and she doesn't give a shit about the talking toy. She's just happy to be visiting her dad and having fun with it, you know, with me. And that exact, you know, conversation that you and I had, and your exact example came up in my mind during that moment, was like, damn, you nailed it. You nailed it. That's, and another point to that, another book that you might want to check out is called Sapiens. And it's a really fascinating breakdown of, Homo sapiens, literally from our remote inception, I guess, to now. And near the end of the book, as we start to get the technological revolution, he talks about how, we have all these time-saving things, which this also, I thought about mentioning this earlier to something else that you had stated. We have all these new technologies and new tools and toys and things that cut down and save time and make things more convenient for us. And yet we're still bogged down. You used to have to wait sometimes, days prior to that, some weeks, months to get a letter. And you could only write it by hand. And you only wrote a letter when you really had something really fucking important to say. And when you had fully gathered your thoughts, and then you finally sat down and wrote it out and then mailed it off to your friend. And now we have Twitter, and people just spit garbage all day. I'm on Twitter, and I gotta be honest, like, I'm not the biggest fan in most instances. I've had to filter a lot of people out just because I don't need to hear every last nuanced, thought that just pops into people's heads every second of every day. I'd rather hear the more profound, intellectual, involved something or other. And you do get some of those on Twitter, but it just goes to show, we even have emails that make things super fast, but you're sending out countless emails now. And instead of just a few very important letters, every couple of weeks kind of thing. And that goes across the board for all forms of media and mediums and travel and tasks that we all have to accomplish on our day-to-day basis. And I think it's a really profound book and a very profound way to look at life. It all comes full circle to that same idea. You know what? We keep wanting to have more time, and we have all these things that save us time, and then we just fill it with more bullshit.
Well, I think there's a point of diminishing returns. Like if you picture a fountain, the water goes up to a certain point and then it comes back down. When you reach a certain level, everything returns to its original inception point eventually. So when you look at the getting of things, that's so fucking important to Americans especially. We're spoiled to tears. We're so spoiled. We have everything we fucking need. We have too much time on our hands to think, so we do fill that time up with work. But the meaning of the work is to get more money. What you said earlier, Ricky, was the work ethic, right? The puritanical work ethic, right? The work ethic is a beautiful thing. I love to work really hard on a composition, all right? I love to work really hard on, getting my music theory established. I was writing the book and working on that. But the goal for me was the accomplishment. It wasn't how much money am I going to make from this, So to me, I think a certain level of limitation is a good thing. I'll give you an example. There's a classic Beatles story that Paul and John, when they first got together, they knew a few chords on the guitar. And they heard about this B7 chord. So they literally got on a bicycle, they got on their bikes and drove for 10 miles on their bicycles because they knew some guy knew what a B7 chord was. So when you go home with that B7 chord, you're going to love it to death because you got this beautiful chord and now you're happy with it, right? But nowadays you go onto YouTube, you got your B7 chord, I'm good. So you don't appreciate the value of the thing you work so hard to get because you get it so instantaneously. So regarding what you said about the millennials, I have to disagree to a point. You said they kind of sussed it all out and they figured it out. What they didn't figure out, actually, I mean, the way I see it anyway, most of these kids, their drive is, I want to be the guy that develops the next big app. That's the goal, and the whole purpose of developing the next big app is to make a ton of cash from it. The problem with modern society is we're so focused on money. Today I had an experience that kind of ties this whole thing together. I ran into an acquaintance of mine. He's my age, and he referred to himself as a failed songwriter. Now, he's posted his stuff on Facebook. He has kind of a 70s style of, pop writing. But he's good. He's a good, solid songwriter. So I turned to him and I said, you're not a failed songwriter. You're a successful songwriter. What you think is failure is you didn't become famous and you don't have a ton of cash and groupies. I mean, really, lately, more and more and more, I started out wanting to be famous, and the more and more I see it, the less I want to be famous. It's just obnoxious to me at this point.
Well, I definitely think success is something different to everybody. I sometimes talk about this podcast, and I talk about how I feel like I've been successful not because I've have a certain amount of downloads or whatever, but just because I get to do this, and I've had this many interesting conversations. And to me, if one person's downloading it, or thousands of people are downloading it, to me, I'm still having the same conversations. I'm still getting the same out of this. I'm getting enjoyment. Yeah. I'm learning. I'm growing, and I'm getting to meet new people. Like, to me, that's the part that motivates me. There's this great book, because a lot of people who, I've gotten a lot of arguments about younger people, and they talk about how they're lazy, this and that, and and we get in this argument about what motivates people. And there's this great book called, and I'm gonna make sure I get it right. It's by Daniel, what's his name? It's called Drive: The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, and it's by Daniel H. Pink. And it's a really interesting book because, and it talks about how we think money is what really motivates us. But you look at all the great, for this podcast, it's perfect. Let's talk about music. All the greatest artists, all the greatest songs, all the greatest music was not driven. Those songwriters, those musicians weren't driven by fame or money. They were driven by the art. They were driven by trying to accomplish something, trying to perfect their art. And you look at Nikola Tesla, you look at and then there's a lot of big corporations and pharmaceutical companies that, but we wouldn't have this if it wasn't for capitalism. But a lot of these companies buy other smaller companies. You'll be amazed how many original ideas these big corporations have. Most of the time, it's none. They buy other really innovative, smaller companies that have these really interesting and groundbreaking thinkers who are motivated not by money, but maybe just trying to accomplish something. And then they're bought out by these bigger corporations. And so it's not capitalism, because sometimes you hear the argument, well, if it wasn't for capitalism, then we wouldn't have all this cool tech, we wouldn't have all this. It's like, no, man, because all those freaking cyberpunks and all the programmers from the 90s and that were really coming up with all this amazing software and coming up with all these creative ways of using computers, like, they weren't motivated by money. Most of them were all about the open source type of mindset. Of idea. I mean, there's a great documentary called I think it's called OS Revolution, Open Source Revolution, and it's it shows how, like, corporations got in the way of all of us having access to all this free software, because they would put this stuff out there for free, and then they had to, like, no, you can't do that. How are we going to make money? How are we going to, and what they wanted to do was, they're like, well, you would pay a programmer to customize maybe Pro Tools for your liking. Maybe there's something about Pro Tools you don't like, so it would be completely open where any programmer could modify it, and then that you'd pay that programmer to customize it in the way that you like, and that's how you would make money. And that's just a different way of thinking. And I think James Corbett talked about this on the last time he was on my podcast, and I think you were on with him, Vinny, was just this idea of, like, we have to rethink the way things have to be. Like, we assume, like, think about, like, every culture, and this kind of I've heard Hunter Motz, who's been on my show, talk about this, how every culture has so many differences, right? Like, when you look at Asian cultures, Middle Eastern cultures, Western European, African cultures, Western cultures, like South American cultures, like every culture has so many differences, but they all think they're the right culture. Like this is what people should be eating. This is the music people should like. This is the way people. This is how many hours people should work. This is how families should gather. This is how often families should gather. Like every culture thinks they have the answer, or they have the proper way of living, the right way of living, and other cultures to them are different and weird. Like, oh, that's weird. That culture does that, or that culture eats that. Like, well, we have to realize that there is no answer. There is no one thing. There is no right way of doing anything. Like and we grow up, and this goes back to just those who are pulling the strings, kind of molding us into just what they want, and that's people who don't think, who just go along with the system, believe this is the way things are, this is the way things have always been, this is the way things have to be. That's why, you need to vote in somebody who's more of the same. You don't want somebody radical, like you don't want somebody like a Ron Paul who he's, that the one thing I would always hear about people who didn't like Ron Paul when he was running is, and of course I don't agree with everything he says, but I think he was definitely the best option. And people would say, oh, but his views are too radical. I'm like, okay, so we'll just continue every 4 years voting in more of the same, and then we'll just be like, okay, why do we keep getting more of the same? Oh, because we keep voting in more of the same. It's this is ridiculous type of thinking, and we have to, and anybody who's been around kids, like, kids are born and they have no idea how society should be or how things work, and whatever we tell them, like, you use this money to pay for things, then you receive something, or you should work 40 hours a week, that's a normal work week, like whatever we plant in them, like that becomes the norm to them. But so we're all just kids who were planted, we were planted these norms, and this is what we should believe, and this is how we should think, and this is how we should live. And there's people like us who some way, I think, and from my perspective, and look, I guess just self-reflecting on my life, I think music was a big part of me being able to break that mold, because music broke that mold. Music, I listened to music that was like, no, I don't want to do this because, like what everybody else is doing. There's other ways of doing it, and there's alternative ways of doing it, and you can push the boundaries. And who cares if they say you can't do this, that this isn't the way music should be written, or this is, this isn't the way, that every song should be just verse, chorus, verse, whatever. Like, I loved artists that pushed those boundaries, and I think that for me, music was what helped me rethink, okay, maybe the way everybody is saying things should be, maybe that's not the way things have to be. And did you guys have similar experiences? Anybody want to jump in?
Vinny, you want to take it away?
I'm not quite sure the question. Similar experiences regarding.
Well, do you think music? Because okay, so the three of us, we can all agree that regardless, I mean, we might differ in maybe specifics in certain things, but we can all agree that we're pretty curious people, and I think our curiosity is probably what brought us together in the first place. Do you think music was, because I think some people, it's a book, it's a documentary, and I remember looking back at my life and I'm like, I remember when I first watched that first Alex Jones documentary, or the Zeitgeist documentary, or whatever documentary or book that kind of helped break that mold and make me rethink what is truth. But now I look back even further, and I'm like, maybe it wasn't that stuff. Maybe the reason I even got to that documentary was because of music. Music was what helped me, force me to, especially writing it. Because I think when you write music, you have to be very honest. You have to look in the mirror. You have to be like, how do I truly feel? Let me tap into this. Let me write this down. And when you do that, you have to be honest. You have to be brutally honest. You have to reflect on certain life situations, for better or worse. Maybe you handled something in a way that you're not happy with, and you're writing about that or whatnot. And I think music probably should get, in my life personally, should get more credit than I give it for at least me going down the rabbit hole of looking for alternative news, alternative truths, alternative history, and really being able to rethink what I thought I knew. And do you think that's a similar case in your life?
Well, I mean, when we talk about music as art or music as a way of getting money, the two different categories. Back in the 80s, I was a pop songwriter, and I was writing in the style of the new wave, like Joe Jackson, Elvis Costello, The Police, and this kind of stuff. And I started shopping my material to different producers in Manhattan. And what I would get many times, seeing different producers, is, this isn't formula. All right, so I felt like slapping these guys, because the guys who made it the biggest back in the 80s were people that broke formula left and right all the fucking time. They pushed the envelope beyond the way things were supposed to be, as you're saying. So, Peter Gabriel pushed the envelope. The Police pushed the envelope. They broke form. And these guys rose to the very top. These idiot producers, I just wanted to slap them. It's like, wake the fuck up. The true talent, the guys that break molds, are the guys that are going to make you money, And they're just so afraid that they're not going to make enough money from what they do. And now it's really bad. I mean, the music industry is virtually dead, as far as big record companies go. But, that's, but as far as, like, music cueing me into, like you say, Alex Jones or something like that, I think that was, for me, it was a separate category, because I saw some things on television back in the 70s that gave me chills, subliminal things, and I had to corroborate it with other people. They saw particular subliminals show up on the Johnny Carson show and shit like this. It was corroborated between a few people, and I thought, wait a second, something bad is happening. This was around the era that the book, famous book in the 70s called Subliminal Seduction. It was about using subliminals to advertise. So I started to catch this stuff, and I'm going, wait a second, somebody's trying to fuck with our minds here. And that kept me really paranoid, along with the fact that, in the 70s, I was doing a bunch of weed and acid, which I'm still doing a bunch of weed and acid, but, that's another story.
There's a go ahead.
I just, encapsulate. I was paranoid to begin with, but still, there were certain things I saw that really there was something funny going on, and I felt it. I'm very sensitive, and I felt it.
I would think that what Ricky's maybe trying to get at more is that the adherence to music, and kind of what we started the better part of the conversation off with, is being musicians and being the type of people that are willing to grow and, aspire to be better, not just in our art, but through that in our lives in general. In that same way, does the music necessarily, something in it also make you open to new forms of media, new forms of thinking, to adhere that also to your life? And I would agree that art in general has done that for me, especially music. But I would say, I think the greater point here, and this is something a theory and topic that I've been wanting to push on other podcasts in the near future, is the idea of how music and art overall is the paradigm shifter.
Absolutely.
We've gone down this path of talking about how in politics, everybody kind of just wants more of the same, and it takes major either catastrophic situations or catalysts or people, individuals like Gandhi or Martin Luther King, to stand up and change those paradigms. But I think what changes the mass, the massive perspective of the overall population ends up always being art. Yeah, and you can look back at this clear to as far as like really solid recorded history goes, to the Age of Enlightenment. So in that era, you had a combination of a lot of phenomenal artists of all forms. This is when you have the full use of the printing press that's been blown up for like 150 years now, and people have mastered the art of how to use it. So in this era, you have a guy like Thomas Paine, who is a phenomenal writer, a phenomenal speaker, and he's able to pump out pamphlets that solidify an idea for a massive amount of people to not maybe all completely back a revolution, but understand what the revolution's about. Because if you really go through the history of it, America wasn't 100% into revolting against England at the time. But people were a little bit more copacetic with it because they had all read, Common Sense and The Rights of Man. Then on the other side of the pond, you have, France, one play. So again, artistic value. A play incited riots and helped bring on their own revolution. And then just across the border, you have Austria at that same time, one of the greatest musicians of all time, Mozart, creating things that people today could only dream of doing. And he himself is creating his own movement and takes that same piece of art and puts it into an opera. And then that type of idea starts to spread even faster. Mm-hmm. And you see that same thing over and over again throughout history, where art becomes the voice or the message or the way to make the idea swallowable for more people. It becomes palatable throughout, and easily distributed to other individuals, and makes that idea something that everyone can hold and carry with them, and then also share it with other people. Brian, and I think that's the overarching narrative for me, at least, and one thing that I've come to understand, and why my band is about what we're about and why we do what we do.
I'd love to comment here, Brian. By the way, this is a side comment. Like when Ricky told me he wanted for me to be on a podcast with you, and I knew you were a metal guy, and Ricky's a metal guy, and I'm just not a metal guy. I said to Ricky, this might be a clash of worlds here. So Ricky said, why don't you just listen to one of our old podcasts and listen to what Brian has to say. And as soon as I heard what you had to say, I thought, wow, I am so on the same page with this guy. So I just want to let you know, I love your thoughts. I love the way you think. You're definitely very cultured and well-read, and I respect that and appreciate it. One thing, I agreed with what you just said, 100%. But I just wonder, do you think... See, what bothers me, I believe that music could change the world. Thoroughly believe it. Don't forget, I grew up in a generation where there was this incredible blossoming of music. The Beatles went from I Want to Hold Your Hand to Tomorrow Never Knows, a totally psychedelic, song based on Tibetan Buddhism within 3 years. I mean, this is a huge change, right? But don't you think that we are so distracted today, looking at screens, looking at our phones, checking out what's going on the internet, that it's kind of sapping people's creativity? I'm not hearing the inspiration, at least in the general popular wave, that what people are listening to in general. Don't you think that's being kind of, I don't know, quashed in a way by all the technology we're inundated with?
Well, I would say that yes and no. As far as the mass populace goes, yes, I can agree that hip hop specifically, it's sad that we have to keep coming back to that. But yeah, the mainstream hip hop or trap music or all of this just gets simpler. It gets dumber. It gets worse.
It is so.
But on the other side of the coin, or die, or however you want to look at it, you have bands like, Opeth is a phenomenal example. Opeth is a metal band that actually, if you personally, Vinny, listen to their old stuff, you probably be like, yeah, definitely not my cup of tea. But then you listen to their latest album or the album before that, it definitely harkens back more to like the 70s rock, kind of reminiscent of Deep Purple almost. And but they're still very progressive. They're challenging the norms of what music is today. And despite the inventiveness of what the music is all about, because that is going to grow and then slow down and then grow again and then maybe regress and then surpass what it was before. I'm watching metal specifically blow away anything metal's ever done before, day by day by day. Bands like Within the Ruins, After the Burial, Between the Buried and Me, like bands like this are insanely pushing the envelope. But lyrically, which I think specifically becomes the real paradigm shifter for a lot of people, you can and will find that if you look hard enough and if you're open to it. And I think if we go back to the idea of resonance, you're finding more and more of those artists starting to like Cream, you know, rise to the top slowly but surely. So artists in the hip hop genre, you have artists like Immortal Technique and Aesop Rock, who are both phenomenal lyricists. I mean, I just get chills thinking about them right now. I got goosebumps. You know, both in their own way, political or artistic, and have something to say about either their own lives or their surroundings or the American, you know, standing at this moment. Metal is the same way. I would like to reflect on at this moment, and this definitely goes more to the point of your question, a singer that I'm a big fan of. His name is Randy Blythe, the singer of a band called Lamb of God. And he had been quoted in saying that it seems that the biggest push for political metal and rock and punk rock typically comes during Republican administrations, specifically in America, which is not to be, you know, it's not super surprising, to be honest.
Right.
But it's in those moments that you start to see some of these kids wake up. And now I'm not going to say every single Megadeth fan completely adheres to the Megadeth ideology. I mean, I know for a fact that most people who listen to System of a Down, who is extremely political, don't understand them at all. For the most part. I'd say maybe 20 to 25% of their fans know what they're actually talking about and support what they're talking about. But the simple fact is that they came into being and they are saying it. And that small percentage of people who may not have known some of these things that they're bringing into the light have already changed their perspectives. And those people will go to change others' perspectives and so on down the line. And that's going to happen again right now. It's already begun. I
want to see it happen. You know, one important point you made is it's there, but you have to dig for it. This has been my frustration. I've heard good pop music even. Why isn't this the stuff that? And again, we're going back to your question, Ricky. Why is it this lowest common denominator that is being spewed out there for people rather than something that's going to excite people, make them, motivate them? I even wonder why people are satisfied with listening to that crap when there is so much that can be satisfying. And Brian, real quick, just a side note, I got an assignment. I got an assignment for you, man. Would you do me a favor? I recognize some of the band names you mentioned, System of a Down and others. But the ones you said that were cutting edge earlier, I never heard of these bands. So could you send me a few links, like some, email absolutely. Me some links, something I could listen to? I like to keep my mind open, and I don't want to say I dislike metal, because there's certainly some metal I really like and respect. So, you know.
Well, I think
to answer your question, I call it the fast food paradox. In the same way that you look at people and you're like, how the fuck are you eating that garbage? You know, like people, there will be a really nice, you know, in fact, perfect example, right up the road here near the college by where I live, there's a really nice poke bowl place. It's fresh fish over rice, you know, it's raw. It's like sushi, you know, similar. Right next door to that, though, is a McDonald's, and that McDonald's is constantly loaded with people. Yeah. And McDonald's is disgusting. Yeah, it's the worst food ever. The last time I ever ate at McDonald's, I was shit-faced.
Yeah.
And that was years ago. I could barely talk on the phone. And that's where I ended up, because that's where everybody else wanted to go. But it's that same thing with the music. You know, the music that gets pushed out is the fast food of the music world, you know, and some of it, you'll find a couple of gems in there, like maybe like one Katy Perry song is like, wow, whoever produced this is a fucking genius. This is very well put together. Like the chord progression is not typical. The beat drop is perfectly articulated. You know, the harmonies in her voice, like they spent a lot of time on this. Bravo. But the rest of the album is fucking bullshit. And the rest of whatever is on that radio station is equally as garbage. It's just fast food for your eardrums. And that, it's the quick buck. Again, it comes back to that capitalist mentality of, you know, you saw the same thing in the 80s with the glam rock scene. You know, yeah, Slayer, Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, all four of them came out at the same time as Motley Crue, Cinderella, Rat, Poison. Guess who's still selling out huge stadiums every single year? Slayer, Metallica, Megadeth. Guess who, out of all those other bands, I can think of maybe one that sells out stadiums by themselves on their own name, and that's Motley Crue. Everybody else can barely pack the whiskey.
Yeah. To get to your point, I think, and I think the fast food example is perfect, because I think it's exactly why people eat fast food, is exactly why people also digest this crappy, just typical music. And there's a great book called The Doritos Effect, and they talk about yeah, and they talk about how, and they use Dorito as an example, the truth about flavor, and why do they say like you can only eat one, and why do I keep wanting more, even though when you look at the ingredients, this shit isn't even really food. Like, it's just a bunch of things pulling on certain triggers and desires in my brain. And so similar to music, like I feel like they understand that there's certain, it's no different than why are people addicted to social media, you know, because we're getting these hits of dopamine, and we're getting these hits of serotonin, and it's like they know which strings to pull at to keep wanting, you wanting more. And same reason why when you taste this Doritos, you know, like there's this story about how they're developing a flavor. I don't know which one, if it was Doritos or some other snack, but how they had like this huge line of people, and each person was trying the snack, but each person had a little bit more salt in that snack, and they're trying to figure out the exact amount of salt or the exact amount of whatever to get you to want more. Oh, this is too much salt. So it's like there's all this science and psychology and money and research that goes into making, so it's almost an unfair battle. And I've had somebody on from the documentary The Corporation, which was one of the biggest selling documentaries from Canada when it came out. And it had like, I don't know, like 15 years of research. And I really broke down basically behind the scenes how marketing companies and how corporations market to you, and everything from like the type of fonts they use, the colors, the sounds, the images, like all, and this goes all the way back to basically using Edward Bernays techniques of
I was hoping you were going to bring him up, but Sam Tripoli and I went way deep into that on his podcast. Yeah,
you know, for people who aren't familiar, and they should be because I've talked about him 1,000 times on the show, but are you familiar with Edward Bernays, Vinny?
Oh yeah.
So you know, for people who aren't familiar with him, his uncle is Sigmund Freud, and he basically his uncle wanted to understand the brain. He almost wanted to take his uncle's research and understand how to manipulate the brain. And he believed what he believed.
He's the father of propaganda.
Yeah, he wrote the first book, Propaganda. He came up with the whole PR and marketing industry. And really, he understood that what really motivates us, or what's really deflecting our decision making a certain way, a lot of those things that are happening are subconscious, and we're not even familiar with what's going on. You know, it's like it's really an unfair fight. It's an unfair fight because the typical kid who's watching cartoons or whatever, and then these commercials come on, doesn't realize, like, he's just a normal kid, average kid, who's just thinking that this commercial is just selling them this toy, but they don't realize that there's certain sounds and music, and they've spent all this research and money to convince you to want this thing, you know. And you know, the documentary The Corporation, I highly recommend people checking it out. and you could probably find it on for free on YouTube by now because it's a little older. But it really goes into how these companies, how they do this, and all the research and marketing goes into it. And nothing is just, I mean, very few things are just popular. Like the Doritos didn't just get popular because it just happens to be a good snack. It's because they've researched and scientifically created it so it pulls on you those certain desires and wants, so you keep wanting more, and you keep eating more, and you keep eating more Pringles, and you keep eating all these snacks that aren't even food, and it's an unfair fight. And music is a very similar, where just like the music industry understands, like, okay, this is a hit, so if we just recreate this and more of this pulls at whatever strings that are getting people to like this, and we'll just keep doing the same. But every once in a while, you do get an artist, like you said, it's like Cream. It's like there'll be an artist that is so revolutionary, so different, so just pushing the boundaries so much that they can't be ignored. And I remember when I was growing up, one of the bands that did that was Slipknot. Like, I remember Slipknot just came out, and all of a sudden it's like, wait, 9 dudes, 3 drummers, they all wear masks. What the fuck? It's like a DJ, a keyboardist. Like, it was a crazy. I'm like, this band can't be real. Like, this can't. And they were so different, and they were so that everybody. I mean, they just blew everybody away, and their music was so aggressive and so dark and heavy and different than anything else. And Nirvana, very similar. Nirvana did the same thing in the early '90s. They came out and they were so anti what was going on in the 80s. They were so different. They were dark. Instead of having this high-pitched voice that everybody loved in the 80s and 70s, he had this deep kind of just sounds like he smoked too many cigarettes voice, and just just played and then this goes back to what's art, right? Because in the 80s, a lot of it was about the solo and showing off how great of a musician I was. And then Nirvana comes around, like, I'm going to just play what benefits the song. I'm just going to be a good songwriter. And if this simple chord benefits the song, then I'm just going to pour my emotions into this chord. And even the simplest of chords can be something very artistic and powerful. And I think bands like Nirvana kind of showed that. And they were one of those bands that kind of broke the mold and were so different than what was popular, but yet couldn't be ignored. Because I think we can only be fed the same bullshit for so long until eventually a song comes out or an artist comes out and we're just like, I need something different. And then it sticks out because it's so different. And I think that's why every once in a while you do get these songs that are hits that are completely different, or these artists that are completely different, because I think you can only feed more of the same for so long until we want something different. And then, if you're at the right place at the right time and you're that artist that's like, oh shit, I heard that song on the radio and it just caught my attention because they were using some synths, or they were using some weird whatever they were doing that was different than all the other songs that played before it, and it caught your attention, and all of a sudden you're Googling them and that band starts growing. And it is this cycle of where, it's like, but then that band, right? And this is where the music industry fucks everything up, because that artist became popular because they were different. But now every record label is looking for bands that sound like them because that's going to make them money. So now you get this flood. I mean, I remember when the metalcore scene got big. You had, I'm wearing a metalcore band right now, Devil Wears Prada. And, when the metalcore scene was getting popular, you had, just a few bands that were getting popular, like, oh, this is really cool. It's a mixture of metal and hardcore and all the breakdowns. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, every fucking band is just a breakdown after breakdown after break. Every band sounds exactly the same. Every band is using keyboards. Every band is doing, and then it's just like, and then you look for something different. Then you go to like Enter Shikari, who's actually talking about political bands. They're from the UK and they're very political, and they started using dubstep and post-hardcore and all of these like weird genres of music and mixed them together, and they were different. And I'm like, oh shit, this is a nice breath of fresh air. And I do think that these cycles happen, and people do get sick of more of this the same. And it sucks because I feel like the music industry does screw things up, because they take a good thing, something that is different, then they just start fucking pushing every band that sounds like it, And I remember talking to bands at shows that were in the Christian scene was really big in the metalcore scene. It was a lot of Christian metalcore bands, and I remember a lot of bands telling us like, hey, those guys aren't Christian. Like there's tons of bands that are just saying they're Christian just because it's selling albums and it's getting them into this scene, and it's and then it ruins things. But then usually the good bands, the bands that were doing it not because they're trying to fit into a scene or not because they're pushed by a record label, the ones that did it because they were original and that was what truly they were doing, those are the bands that stick around. You get the Under Oaths, you get the whoever that sticks around for a long period of time and really lasts. And I think you see that in a lot of genres. Like you see, in the 80s, you got a lot of the hair metal crappy bands, and the good ones are the ones that are still playing. Like you get you get Iron Maiden, who's late 70s to the 80s, like they're still jamming out, and they're still fucking awesome, and they've been around for a long time, and yet they kind of do sound like the 80s, but they were good, and they weren't doing it because they were trying to get laid. They weren't doing it because well, I can't say that, maybe they were, but but their music. I
think that's every musician's motivation.
Yeah, that's true.
Every guy musician,
yeah.
At least.
But I think that there's some people like them because there's some substance to it. They had songs like The Trooper and songs that were about war or whatever. It was different than just the songs like Girls, Girls, Girls. Like Motley Crue, just talking about the same old partying and all that stuff. And hip hop's the same way. I mean, you get artists like you said, Immortal Techniques, Low Key. I don't know if you're familiar with Low Key from England. He's awesome. I mean, I've been trying. I guess he's back into writing music again now. But Akala, Akala, I forget how to pronounce his name. But he's another one, and it seems like a lot of good UK political artists, because Enter Shikari's one, The Architects are another great one. There's a lot of really good political bands from there, but I think maybe that's a European thing. I think in Europe, I almost feel like in America we're just like we're North Korea, but we don't know it. Like we are so we're so.
I've heard a lot of people making that comparison lately.
Because it seems like you go to Europe or you talk to people from Europe, and they just have more resources for news. They have even BBC, RT. Portugal has a couple popular ones that really do international news and do it where they kind of just do what news should do, and they're like, hey, there was this bombing in this country. This country did the bombing. This country got bombed. Where in America, it's never just that cut and dry unless it's local news. Like local news will tell you, drunk driver hit this telephone pole or hit this house. But when it's national news, there's always a spin to it. There's always an agenda. They're only telling you this story because they want to mold your perspective on it. And I think that's a dangerous thing, and that's why I say like we are this weird North Korean type of society where we're so isolated from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world's much smarter when it comes down to history too, because their history goes back much further. And you go to school in America, and they teach you from basically the world started when America was created. Like there is no history before that. They don't. It's like I remember growing up and like being Portuguese, and I remember telling my dad, I'm like, how come, like, where the fuck was Portugal in the 1700s? I'm like, I don't hear anything about them. And they're like, really? They don't tell you anything about this or that? And I'm like, no, man. And, it's really amazing how even as a kid, you don't realize it, but it's like you're getting this very, like, they're molding your perspective on the world by thinking that the whole world revolves around this one country, where like you go to Europe and a lot of their history is intertwined with other countries and other cultures. So you learn about the Moors traveling to the west and going to Portugal and all these interesting things where in America it's almost like as a young kid you already start turning into this adult who thinks the world revolves around us. Everything revolves around us. Who cares about soccer? Who cares about this culture, that culture? We're the best. We're the land of the free, home of the brave. All this stuff, and then let's join the military, America. All that stuff. And I mean, you see it with even bands like Five Finger Death Punch, the very patriotic, like.
Oh God, yes, I can't take how.
I know. This for Vinny, for
so bad.
There's bands like this band Five Finger Death Punch that's super like not every because I've kind of lost track of what they're doing, but I mean it was a lot of like patriotic, like, you know, every Five Finger Death Punch shirt has American flag, and it's metal, and it's proud to be American, and it's like all this. It's like, dude, what? And the worst part is that kids are so easily influenced because you love this band, and whatever they say and whatever they believe, you're just gonna back it. You know, I've seen there's this band Ford Today, who's like this super religious metal band. I don't even know if they're still playing, but they were super Christian, like super Christian. Every song was you know, about something to do with religion, and between songs they would talk about God and being his savior, and all these people. I mean, you felt like you're at a fucking cult. Like, everybody's just like, yeah, you know, and it's just like, these kids aren't thinking for themselves. Like, these kids, they just love the band, and they're just doing and saying whatever this band says, you know. And I think that's the thing about revolutions, and you talked about music being very influential and art being very influential to change. But that's because as you get older, what do you always hear about with older people? Like, oh, I've kind of lost track of what's going on in the metal scene or the music scene or the jazz scene, or I haven't bought a new album in forever. I like my old shit and I don't listen to anything new. Like, the young people are always the ones who are up to date with music and passionate about it, and those are the ones you're influencing. And I think it's so important as musicians or artists in general to really have, just consciously know that you're not just influencing, like, your own beliefs are influencing younger crowds, and you should always be open to the idea of saying, hey, this is what I believe, this is what I think. But think for your fucking self, you know. It's don't just follow me because you're a fan of me. Don't just like me, like what I do. Don't become a vegan because I'm a vegan. You know, I mean, you see that all the time. Like, oh, this band I like are vegans, and they talk about it. You know, I think architects they're vegans, and I'll never be a vegan. I love meat too much. But the thing is, people will do it just because of the influence of this. So you're not really thinking for yourself. And I think, you know, kids when they're young, like, they are the ones who can change the world, because they're the ones, who have the time, right? They have the time, like, they have the time, they have the energy, the passion. I mean, you look at protesters, you look at what's going on in college campuses now, like, all the uproar, all the people who are in the streets protesting, it's always young people who are angry. And
well, it comes back to the beginning of the conversation when you talk about being 16 and in love, and you might have more of an adherence to love because you're so young. I mean, we could look at it as like a mathematical thing of, like, you've only been on Earth this long, so this is as much as you understand, and this is the fraction of your life that this is taken up, and so forth. But, you know, that passion should not be ignored by any means, because those people will be the future leaders of the world. And to a more direct point of I guess an overarching narrative of what you're talking about, you know, I think when bands do come out with a perspective and with a point that means something that's not just the constant narrative you get out of everybody else and the mass media and all these things, bands like that come to eventually find that it is an uphill battle. I mean, I haven't read as to exactly why Rage Against the Machine or System of a Down eventually did split up, but I was there for System of a Down's one of their last tours, and they on stage were talking about, you know, we're tired of this war that's strictly about oil. And when they started to go off on this little banter, and I live here in San Bernardino, and they were playing at like the big, huge, you know, amphitheater here, and a good chunk of the audience started to boo them because,
oh, that's frightening,
right? Because they're like, oh, you're anti-war, support the troops. And I'm not saying don't support the troops. You can support the troops. You don't have to support the war. Those are two separate things. And right there, that's another propaganda thing we can get into another day.
Well, I think supporting the troops is being anti-war. What could be more supportive to the troops than saying, hey, nobody should fucking put their lives on the line unless it's for a just cause and it's a last resort. Like, to me, that is very true. They've convinced us this idea that, like, to me, it would get me so angry because people you would talk about, like, if you couldn't be anti-war and for the troops. Like, especially during the Iraq War, it was always like, if you were anti the Iraq War, then you weren't for the troops. It's like, well, how about you look at the statistic that, like, what is it, like 3 out of every 5 homeless people is a veteran? How about you look at the statistic of all, KBR, Hollenberg, all the money that taxpayers are going to giving away to these big corporations that are doing, going into a country doing God knows what for whatever purpose, and yet these veterans come back and they can't get insurance, or they can't get health care, or they have some disease, or like even recently, I remember seeing an interview with the guy who wrote the book on the fire pits in Afghanistan, I believe, that the military was burning, basically they didn't know what to do with all this junk from the wars, so they're just like, we'll just burn all of it, dead bodies, everything. And they were telling them that it was completely safe to breathe in and be around. Well, all these guys now have fucking cancer and they're dying. And they lied to him, and they knew that they lied to him. And it was, and stuff like that happens all the fucking time. And to me, when people, I had Adam Kokesh on, who's an Iraqi veteran. I've had, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who was Chief of Staff for Colin Powell and was a Vietnam vet. Jesse Ventura, who's a Vietnam vet. Like, some of the people who've actually experienced war, they're some of the most anti-war people you ever meet, And it's always these, like Jesse Ventura calls them chicken hawks, the people who didn't experience it, that didn't go, but now they want to send your kids, they want to send your friends, They were chickens when it was their turn, but now they're hawks when it's time to send other people's kids. And it just, it really frustrates me because, to me, like, I think the most pro-troops people through history have always been the anti-war people, because they're saying that nobody should have to die unless it's a last resort. And the truth is that most of these fights, if not all these fights that we have going on, and we have troops all over the world, Africa, Asia, Middle East, everywhere, none of these conflicts, if we just left them alone, would ever affect the everyday life of a American. What's going on in I mean, look at Libya, it's a fucking mess. You look at Iraq, it's a mess. You look at Afghanistan, it's a mess. You look at all these places we get in conflicts. And honestly, in Syria, if they weren't friends and business partners with China and Russia, we would have taken them down too. And if if Iran gives up all their nuclear weapons, we'd be fucking taking them down too, and those countries would be messes too. And none of these countries are actually threats to us. Like, it's crazy.
No country is a threat to America. Our military is literally stronger than the next 3 largest militaries in the world. And we dump more money into our military than any other 3 countries combined. On that note, yeah. I'm very sorry that I have to say this. I do have to leave in a few minutes here. 2, my phone's almost out of power. But I did want to use this moment and this conversation as part of the conversation to plug Contortion will be releasing a music video about this exact subject in a couple of months. We're still in the process of working on it. I put a lot of time, a lot of thought, a lot of effort into the video. It's a song off our album that just got released. The song's called Land of the Blind. And today, in fact, during this conversation we're having right now, we just released our first lyric video from this album just like an hour ago. So please, everybody, go and check that out. That song is called Faceless Enemy. Band is called Contortion.
Yeah, I saw it actually.
I want to say thank you so much for inviting me on again, Ricky. And Vinny, I will definitely be emailing you. You're right there in LA, so maybe we'll get a beer next time I'm out in the area.
Sounds great, man.
I tend to go out there at least once a month at the bare minimum.
Well, I'll tell you what, man, I'm thinking maybe I should visit you because I was looking, you were sitting outside before, and I'm going, damn, it is a sunny day. It's overcast and gloomy here in Venice because we have the marine layer.
Warm. Yeah, it's beautiful and warm all day today. It's the Inland Empire.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I'll leave you guys to it, but thank you again. I love being on here, and I look forward to the next one for sure, Ricky.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brian.
Take care, man.
Keep in touch.
Good talking.
All right, have a good one, gents.
Have a good one. And I guess I should be going too, Ricky, but thoroughly enjoyed this.
Yeah. Thanks for taking the time. Hopefully we'll do it again. I love just bringing people together. It's almost like if you don't have anybody, it's like I can go online and meet people I want to hang out with and actually hang out with them because of Skype. I can actually spend time, finding friends. It's like, let me go online and find some people who think like me, and I could hold a conversation with, and I think that's what a lot of people get out of podcasts, because when I first got into listening to podcasts, that was the big thing, was I was hearing conversations I wish I could have with some of my friends. I'm like, I wish I had somebody to talk to about these things and thought about these things like I do and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of people, who knows, in the Midwest, I get downloads from all over the world. So, I mean, there's probably somebody, I was just interviewed recently from somebody from Afghanistan, and to me, it's mind-blowing that, like, podcasts can do that. They can reach everywhere, and there's somebody, in God knows what country, with probably not too many people who are open to new ideas and curious like we are, that are really desiring these type of conversations, and hopefully we fill that spot in their lives, and hopefully we help people connect. I mean, that's the kind of the pros and cons of technology. We've talked a lot about how technology and research and corporations have used technology to kind of brainwash us and stuff, but it's not really technology's fault. It's how we choose to use it. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's one thing we got to. And in this case, I mean, if this was 20 years ago, I wouldn't be able to do this. So it's just we do live in a world where today we can either use a cell phone or the internet or whatever to research, to watch your videos, and learn about music theory, to hear podcasts, to listen, watch a documentary from James Corbett or whatever, and really expand our minds. Or we can use it to just check our Facebook feed or Instagram feed or Twitter feed and just see a bunch of useless comments and conversations. So I think to me it's always weird when I meet people who aren't as curious as people like us, because people who are just completely okay with just going along with the herd and never asking why, to me that's completely just weird and strange to me. To me it's like like yourself, you're constantly searching and looking and asking questions and trying to answer them. That to me is my, that's my normal way of thinking. I don't know any other way of thinking, and to me, ignorance isn't bliss. It's torture, To me, it's that's kind of the way I look at it. It is torture to not know and to not want to figure things out. To me, it's a weird lack of desire for certain people to want to look inside and look outside and try to figure things out. To me, it's so, I don't know how to describe it, but to me it's such a weird thing to me, people who have that type of thinking. And I've been lucky enough to be around people who are like myself, the complete opposites.
I think people are terrified of reality. I think that's what it boils down to. You find yourself in a human body and you go, what the fuck? How did I get here? And you look out into the sky and you see an infinite universe, and it's pretty scary to actually have that awareness that you have no idea what you're doing here. So I think a lot of people, like you said, ignorance is torture. I agree. And I think it's buffered by this fat padding of numbness. And that's what people are reaching for. They want to be numb. They don't want to see reality because they're terrified of it. And I think that's the existential bottom line for humanity today. Unfortunately, there's no leadership that's coming along and saying, look, yeah, things are like this. This is reality, but we could do this, and this while we're here. Why don't we do it? I mean, I've always thought humanity has everything backwards. I've always thought, well, wait a second. Here we are, this massive people on this little planet spinning around in infinity. Our first number one priority is, let's find out what the fuck we're doing here. Look, what is all of this? That should be the number one thing people are doing right now. So it seems to me humanity is right now, the human experiment is a massive failure. And if I was an extraterrestrial watching what's going on, I'd say, you know what? Let's leave them alone for another 20,000 years. We'll come back later and see if they've grown up a little bit.
Yeah, if they've figured it out. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, to me, it's always the most important question is why? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? Why should I do this? Why should I do that? What really makes me happy? Why does it make me happy? All these questions that you hope kind of lead you down the right path of figuring out, or at least getting closer to figuring out what makes you happy and what you should be wasting your time and spending your time doing and what you shouldn't. And it really is. It's completely mind-blowing when people just don't care. But I think a lot of it, like you said, I think a little bit is ignorance is bliss. People are like, okay, I can either kill myself with just overthinking this stuff, because I've had conversations like we've had today with with groups of friends during a party or a get together, and people are like, fuck man, this shit's depressing, right. And you could tell like they want to just like get out of this conversation. They'd rather be like, okay, I'm glad I know this stuff and I'm glad we talked about it, but let's go back to dick jokes and watch some sports.
Right.
So I think it probably is a little scary, and it's a little overwhelming and hard for people to digest, and sometimes it is easier just to be like, you know what, and I think a lot of it too is people think that, hey, I can't fucking do anything, so what's the point of me stressing about it? Let me just live my life and do the best I can. But I think that way of thinking is so dangerous, and I've said it on this podcast over and over again. I truly believe in the ripple effect. I believe that we can all make a difference, and the second you believe you can't make a difference, we've lost, because every great change in the world has come from somebody who convinced himself he could make a difference and that he was going to at least attempt to. And it started off with just a person and a idea, and then he shared that idea or pushed that idea or attempted to do something with that idea. And that's what sparked a difference. So, if Martin Luther King decided that, hey, racism just exists, what the fucking I do, he would never become the person that he, the historic figure that he is today. So I think that and there's probably a lot of other great thinkers of his time who probably did think that and maybe didn't go over and beyond with sharing his ideas and attempting to do something. And to me, that, to go back to the beginning of this podcast about success, to me, that's what success is. It's not how much you actually accomplish, but it's how much you actually attempt to accomplish. And if you give it your best shot, and you can look back and be happy with that. But if you don't give it your best shot, you're going to have regrets. And you meet people later in life who look back and they say, hey, I wish I pursued that a little further. I wish I attempted to do this. You never meet somebody who says, I wish I gave up sooner. I wish I didn't,
right.
It's like, you don't see that, so I think that tells you something. And these are people who get at a certain age and can reflect a little bit and look back and really rethink what, or look at how they could have rethought their actions. And when people tell you, hey, I wish I pursued that or whatever, that's because in the long run, you're going to be much happier knowing that you attempted to do something than you didn't. And I think everybody listening, every musician, every artist, every podcaster, whatever your passion is, pursue it, because like you said, success is internal. It's not external. It's not, it's how it makes you feel. Like success is me being able to have these conversations and meet these people. To me, that's I feel successful. Like it doesn't matter how many more downloads another podcast gets from mine. Like to me, that doesn't matter how big of a guest somebody gets. I don't even care how big the guest is. Like I care what I get out of these conversations and how important these conversations are. And to feel like I get to share these conversations with people, connect with these people, and then I have the opportunity of also sharing these with listeners, then that's just a plus. That's just the whipped cream on the cake. So it's it really is. I think that thought, that I keep pushing on people, like that we can all start our own ripple, we can all make a difference. I keep pushing that on people because I think that people need to continuously hear it. Because if not, they'll turn this podcast off and they'll go on with their everyday lives, and they'll just forget about it. But they forget that you and I could easily you could be doing a 9-to-5 job or whatever, and not doing music, and I could easily be doing. I am doing a 9-to-5, not 9-7 to whatever 4 job, but I could make excuses to not do this podcast and not have all these amazing experiences, this growing that I've taken from these conversations, and be able to look back and say, hey, I've met some amazing people, and I've attempted to make the world a little better than I received it, and I can look back and be happy at that. And so I think that's why I keep knocking at that, and I keep kind of beating a dead horse. Is I keep telling people, don't just turn off the podcast and go back to the same pattern, because we are creatures of habit, and we can get back on that treadmill and run in place and never do anything and just be a part of this crappy system that was created by the rich and powerful to benefit them. Or we could say, no, I'm going to do what makes me happy, and regardless of other sacrifices. And there are sacrifices. I'm sure you sacrifice many nights that you could be dating girls or going out drinking to play music or whatever, but it's not really a sacrifice because you enjoy the shit you're doing, you know. And when you actually start doing it, I mean, I remember spending nights writing music or spending nights emailing people for a podcast and this and that, and you know, to some people it might look like, oh, you know, you got 2 hours of sleep or 3 hours of sleep, you're sacrificing sleep for this thing, but it's not sacrifice because I'm getting enjoyment out of it. And I think, you know, it's like that old saying, if you find something you love, then, or if you find a job you love, you never work a day in your life. And
right.
I think it's true, you know, it's find something you love and pursue it. I mean, when you get the chance to meet people all over the world with different backgrounds, you know, and people who have accomplished a lot, people who've accomplished less, you realize that they're all just people, and they're all just people who worked at it and either was at the right place at the right time or had a great idea or whatever, but we're all just people just pursuing something. And if you never pursue something, then you never get that chance to possibly be at the right place at the right time and really succeed, you know. So yeah, I think that's that's
all right. Well, listen, before I sign off, I want your permission for something.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to create a Facebook status update attributed to you, and it's going to be a quote that says, success isn't what you've accomplished, it's what you've attempted to accomplish, because I love that.
Oh, thank you.
That's beautiful what you said.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. You know, it's funny because I've asked my listeners, and actually I'll ask them again. These podcasts are long, and I don't have the time to go through them all and find, but I think there's so many little gems in these podcasts, you know, little, you know, something you might have said that stuck with me. And then after the show, I'll be like, what the fuck did Vinnie say? There was something there that just really hit a chord. And if listeners are out there and if they want to do this, I'll start a playlist on my YouTube channel with just little clips of shows that you guys liked, something, a little rant that a guest went on, a little quote that they said, a piece of advice, or whatever. Because sometimes it's easier to get people to digest that little clip, you know, than a whole show. And so, you know, that's something, because I know some other shows, it's not original thought, some other shows do that. Well, they'll take a little part of the conversation, maybe 5 minutes out of the show, and they'll share that as a clip. And
highlight, yeah.
Yeah, a little highlight, yeah. So, you know, that's something I think people should do. And I think, you know, in these long conversations, there's a lot of times there are these amazing little gems that, and that's what's fun about these conversations, that they're journeys. You know, you never know where they're going. It's like you'll bring up something, and then I'll be like, oh shit, I never even thought about it that way, and then it sparks this other conversation, and it's this fun. It's kind of like jamming with the minds. You know, it's like you know, it's the same way like you know, jamming. You're not really following anybody. Everybody's kind of just going with the flow and seeing where this is going. It's kind of the way I like these conversations. It's very similar, where it's just like, I try to just kind of get it going. Like, it's like, hey, Ricky, just start playing your guitar. I'll follow you, you know? And it's like, and then you need somebody to start it. And then once we get flowing and we get in these rhythms and with this flow, then it's just fun because you never know where it leads. And I think that's why I like not having any strict guidelines or anything like that, because if you do, then you might never go down that road that, you know, we go down, because it's like, oh, we weren't supposed to talk about this. We're supposed to spend more time talking about this stuff, you know. But I think people really enjoy that aspect of the show, and it's more organic of a conversation. That's the way conversation in real life really is. If we're all hanging out having, you know, a drink at the bar, and me, you, and Brian are bullshitting, it'd be exactly like the conversation we just had, you know. So I think that's what people really appreciate.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks again, Vinnie. We'll keep in touch, and
awesome.
And then hopefully sometime in the near future we'll have you back on with James again. You know, because I know James and I both enjoy those conversations, and maybe in the future also with Brian again. So
excellent.
We'll keep this going. I enjoy it, and I have no reason not to continue doing it. So absolutely.
All right. Well, take care then, and we'll speak soon.
Absolutely, Vinnie. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
the ripple effect.